Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the NRIC Quality Assurance Tech Talk. This is the first in a three-part series on quality assurance. My name is Stephanie Weir, and I'm the Siting and Regulatory Strategy Manager for the National Reactor Innovation Center, or NRIC, and I'll be introducing our speakers and moderating this event. Before we begin, I would first like to go over a couple of items so that you know how best to participate in today's Tech Talk. For the best experience, we recommend turning off the VPN or Citrix connections. Please submit any questions you might have by typing the questions into the question section of the control panel. You can send those questions at any time during the presentation, and we will address them at the end during a Q&A session. If you have any technical problems, please put them in the chat. If you have programmatic questions about NRIC, please feel free to email us at nric@inl.gov. This event is being recorded and will be posted on the NRIC website, and your attendance is consent to that recording. So just to provide a little bit of background, the National Reactor Innovation Center was established by the U.S. Department of Energy after authorization of the Nuclear Energy Innovation Capabilities Act, and we work to accelerate the demonstration and deployment of advanced nuclear energy through partnership with the private sector. NRIC enables developers to harness the world-class capabilities of DOE's National Laboratory system in order to bridge the gap between concept and commercialization. Our vision at NRIC is to support the demonstration of at least 2 advanced reactors by 2025. Next slide, please. So our vision is to see that this to support the demonstration of at least 2 advanced reactors by 2025, and then to see commercial advanced nuclear energy available by 2030 to contribute to abundant clean energy. We work to achieve that vision through our mission. Next slide, please. Our mission is to inspire stakeholders and the public, to empower innovators to test and demonstrate their technologies, and to deliver successful outcomes through official coordination of partners and resources. Next slide, please. We partner with the private sector, national labs, DOE programs, industry groups, agencies, and other regulators to decrease the risks associated with new technologies and deployment. We work to provide access to capabilities, facilities, and tools essential to the demonstration of these new technologies. Next slide, please. Advanced reactor developers will need a firm understanding of quality assurance requirements and the role they play in the successful deployment of a new reactor design. This first presentation will provide some of the basics of quality assurance, particularly the fundamentals of U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission's quality assurance requirements, the importance of quality assurance and of addressing it early, and some of the ways that industry approaches QA. Our next Tech Talk in this series, scheduled for early November, will dive deeper. We will look at similarities and differences between the U.S. Department of Energy and the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission requirements, the process for engagement with QA professionals at national laboratories, budgeting for QA, and much more. The final Tech Talk in this series, coming in early December, will look at quality assurance best practices and lessons learned from QA case studies. We are really fortunate to have 3 experts in this field with us today. Our speakers today are US NRC's Paul Prescott, NEI's Mark Richter, and NUPIC's Roger Mills. In the interest of time, and we have a lot of great material to cover, we're going to put the biographies on our website, and I'll drop a link to that in the chat. So hopefully we will have worked out some of our technical problems, and I'd like to hand the floor over to NRC's Paul Prescott. Paul, if you're available, the floor is yours.
Stephanie, can you hear me okay? Stephanie?
We can. Yes, thank you. You're on.
All right. It was quite the journey to get here.
Thank you for persevering.
Again, as was discussed, we're here to discuss the basics of quality assurance. I'm going to try to keep it more relevant in that we'll talk about what's important, I think, in the current regulatory framework and what is necessary for you to do as an applicant or a potential vendor who may want to supply to the current or the potential fleet of advanced reactors. So today we're going to discuss the basics of what requires a quality assurance program, what the scope of the program needs to be based on the desired application, and where the guidance is located. Bear in mind, this presentation is based on the current regulatory framework, which is geared toward light water reactors and not advanced reactors. The ongoing Part 53 rulemaking is not yet sufficiently defined to discuss here today. I will also briefly discuss the NRC position on ISO 9001 that Mark's going to discuss more, and where information related to that position can be found. Next slide, please. So just some early history. On July 17, 1969, the Atomic Energy Commission, or AEC, published in the Federal Register a proposed amendment to 10 CFR 50 to insert Appendix B, which is quality assurance criteria for nuclear power plants. This appendix was officially approved on June 27, 1970, and published in the Federal Register. Appendix B is a quality assurance document for U.S. nuclear facilities. This document establishes 18 basic requirements to design, construct, manufacture, operate structures, systems, and components related to safety. The 18 basic criteria, or requirements, describe what shall be done, but not how, in order to do it. So in order to standardize the actions of nuclear facilities during 10 CFR 50 Appendix B implementation, the industry has developed some documents. The main ones are ASME, or American Society of Mechanical Engineers, and QA1, which is Quality Assurance Requirements for Nuclear Facility Applications, and the series, the ANSI series, or American National Standards Institute, and 45.2, which is Quality Assurance Program Requirements for Nuclear Facilities. Both documents are approved by the NRC, or Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The NRC is the licensing body of U.S. nuclear facilities. So what is quality assurance? As defined in Appendix B, it's all those planned and systematic actions necessary to provide adequate confidence that a structure, system, or component will perform satisfactorily in service. Quality assurance includes quality control, which comprises those quality assurance actions related to the physical characteristics of a material, structure, component, or system, which provide a means to control the quality of the material, structure, component, or system to predetermined requirements. So next slide, please. So what am I responsible for providing in an application for a QA program? Well, again, it depends on the scope of your activities that we went over just earlier. So for a COL application, say, the examples of principal activities during the design phase would be the performance of analyses by hand calculation or computer. Important aspects of the design phase would be controller design input data, controller design outputs, independent checking of analyses, verification and validation of computer codes, appropriate benchmarking using verified examples, configuration control, that is, controller changes, preparation of the design, construction drawings. So those are a few examples of that. Additionally, would also include procurement controls. Examples include preparation of the purchase specifications, bid evaluation, vendor audits, and receipt inspection. So what I'm trying to point out here is there's flexibility in what an applicant would provide in the way of a QA program. The QA program only needs to cover the scope of planned activities. For example, an applicant coming in for design certification may not need to apply Criterion 13, handling, shipping, and storage, or Criterion 9, control of special processes. Alternatively, if an applicant wants to provide a QA program to address the design, construction, operations phase, that is also an option. And again, these options are the same for a vendor who is going to do work for a licensee or an applicant. They develop or they scope their QA program to the scope of activities that they plan to do. Again, we encourage applicants to contact the staff early in the effort of the development of a QA program with any questions or clarifications that may be beneficial before the submittal of the document. The QA program is usually the first to be submitted for review and acceptance to avoid problems, such as questioning how the ongoing applicant's work was conducted under adequate controls. And what I've given you here in this slide are where you can find some of these requirements as to why am I submitting a QA program. So next slide, please. So where do I find the guidance as an applicant or a vendor on implementing a QA program? The standard review plan that's mentioned here, New Reg 0800, has been prepared to establish criteria of the NRC staff responsible for the review of applications to construct and operate nuclear power plants uses in evaluating whether an applicant or licensee meets the NRC regulations. The SRP, or Standard Review Plan, is not a substitute for the NRC regulations, and compliance with it is not required. However, an applicant is required to identify differences between the QA program proposed for its facility and the Standard Review Plan acceptance criteria, and evaluate how the proposed alternatives to the Standard Review Plan acceptance criteria provide an acceptable method of complying with the NRC regulations. The current regulatory guide 1.28, Rev 5, which is dated in October 2017, endorses parts 1 and 2 of NQA 1, 2011, and the addenda, and 2008, 2012, and 2015 as providing an adequate basis for complying with the requirements of 10 CFR 50 Appendix B for the implementation of quality assurance programs during the design and construction phases of nuclear power plants and fuel reprocessing plants. If you go into Reg Guide 1.28, there are a number of regulatory positions associated with it that provide exceptions and clarifications to parts 1 and 2. One has to do with audit participation of prospective lead auditors, the use of ILAC, or the International Laboratory Accreditation Corporation, for laboratory calibration and testing services is acceptable as described in NEI 1405, and which is the guidelines for the use of accreditation in lieu of commercial grade surveys for procurement of laboratory calibration test services, in lieu of performing commercial grade surveys as part of their commercial grade dedication process for procurement of calibration and testing services performed by both domestic and international labs. There is guidance on the retention of lifetime and non-permanent records. There is guidance on electronic records and industry guidance in the Nuclear Information and Records Management Association, or NIRMA, technical guides to establish appropriate quality controls of software. There's guidance on internal audits. Applicable elements of a QA's organization program should be audited at least once a year or at least once during the life of an activity, whichever is shorter. Also, external audits guidance that states the following, that following the award of contract, the applicant or licensee may determine, based on evaluation, that external audits are not necessary for procuring items that are relatively simple and standard designed and are adaptable to standard automated inspections or tests of the end product to verify quality characteristics at the delivery. Audits should also be conducted on a triennial basis or arranged for such an audit. Now, the reason these regulatory positions are in there is that the staff position is that more guidance was needed in these particular areas. And so in order to use NQA1, you would have to supplement it with these additional regulatory positions. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide, and Mark's going to talk about this, but what all I wanted to do here was to outline what the staff position on the use of ISO for nuclear power plants that was given in SECI 03117. There were 4 options that were provided to the commission. Bear in mind that the SECI was written with a singular point of view towards light water reactors, not advanced reactors. The QA requirements may be modified under Part 53, which would lead to modifications in the staff's position outlined in the SECI. Thus, ISO as an alternative to Appendix B may be found acceptable. So I wanted to make that clear because I'm listing the 4 options here, and we had a codicil associated with option 1. The second option provided for the use of a nuclear sector-specific ISO-based program. SECI 03117 includes an appendix that goes over the differences between Appendix B requirements that are not addressed by ISO 9001. Some of the more significant differences include independent design verification provisions, imposition of appropriate quality assurance provisions by suppliers on sub-suppliers, inspections not to be performed by worker who perform the activity, and licensees audit Appendix B suppliers in contrast to ISO supplier contracted audit requirements. Other regulated industries such as the aerospace, automotive, and petrochemical industries utilizing ISO 9000 based quality programs, and their regulators have recognized the need for supplemental requirements due to the risk with these activities that they cover. Option 3 means the licensee imposes any additional quality requirements contractually to supplement as needed what is required for the item and service. Finally, option 4 would allow crediting the ISO program as part of a typical commercial grade dedication process. So that was the end of my presentation. I know that was real quick, and I'm really kind of looking forward to questions on where we want to go, but I don't know if we're taking questions later, Stephanie, or are we doing it now?
So we were going to do all of the question and answer at the very end. So if you have questions, we'll have everybody put them in the question portion of the panel here, and then we'll circle back at the end of all 3 presentations. And thank you, Paul, so much for providing us with such great information. I guess we'll pass the baton now to Mark.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay. Hey, I think the way the presentations are lined up, I think is ideal, and I certainly appreciate Paul's sort of teeing up the ISO 9001 discussion. I think his talk was really outstanding, sort of a general view of QA programs, and the example he provided here towards the end, I think, is certainly topical for what I'm about to share with you. So with that, next slide. Okay, I wanted to just briefly give a quick overview of NEI for those of you that may be unfamiliar or not extremely familiar with who we are, what we do, where we're located, and so forth. We present ourselves as the policy organization of the nuclear energy industry, and it's really more than energy, although that's how we're primarily viewed and associated. We also deal with issues related to nuclear waste and transportation, medicine, and other R&D areas. Our headquarters and our main offices are in Washington, D.C. We are a member-supported association. We currently have over 330 members. Our membership includes licensees, generating companies, suppliers, large and small, universities and colleges, law firms, consultants, and I'm sure in this list I've probably overlooked a category or 2 of member, but our membership is pretty broad and pretty deep. And we have expertise here, both in generation and issues related to generating facilities. We also look at used fuel and decommissioning issues. Suppliers, supply chain is very important to us. We have a security group that deals with both physical and cyber security, as well as emergency preparedness. Government affairs, some people think that's lobbyists, but it's really much more than that. It's about helping to shape policy and in a way that's consistent with our industry strategy as well as our regulatory position. There's sort of a number of points of tangency there that we like to be consistent with our messaging and also with our work. Have a communications group, that's our outward public-facing messaging. We have a legal and regulatory group, and we also have a conference and events and member services group. Our ability to host conferences and workshops and so forth is very important to us, because we really think the ability to convene the industry, and that often will include regulators, often include international members, and even trade press, is very important, not just for the message that the formal aspect of the meeting would provide, but also for any number of those side conversations that take place, during coffee breaks and meals and so forth. We really put a lot of emphasis on and see a high value in convening the industry. So next slide, please. Okay, I won't dwell on this, because I think every presentation in every group over the last couple of years has beat this drum pretty hard. There's a big push, and has been, for developing carbon-free sources of electricity. The graphic on the right sort of represents a growing and potentially diverse market for electricity, and a golden opportunity for new nuclear and more specifically advanced reactors to sort of fill that void or take advantage of those opportunities. And as we've said before, the windmills and solar panels by themselves, there's no hope of achieving what it is the market promise offers. So nuclear has got to be a part of the picture going forward. And the advanced reactor companies, our members, have some pretty aggressive plans for developing and deploying their advanced reactors. And one of the concerns that we have is that the license application load that the regulators may see, it may be overwhelming. I'm not going to speak to that in any greater detail, because that's outside of my area, but potentially it could be significant. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so to maybe pick up a little bit where, back one. Must be a lag. Okay, right there, thank you. Yeah, picking up a little bit where Paul left off, relative to ISO 9001, and what we are attempting to do here along with industry is developing a process where you could use ISO 9001 as a framework for meeting the requirements of 10 CFR Part 50 Appendix B. And our vision is that this will help support a more nimble and competitive supply chain, offer a larger and growing, potentially a growing community of suppliers, potentially for the operating fleet, but certainly with a focus on the new and advanced reactors. And you might ask, well, why not just use NQA1 or some other more standard approaches? If we get back to potential possibility of developing 100 to as many as 300 new and advanced reactors in the next decade or so, I think the historic pool of suppliers will not be have sufficient capacity to do that. So the smaller suppliers are, I think, really going to be essential part of the supply chain. And if we can offer an approach where a 9001 supplier with some additional requirements imposed can supply this industry, then that would reduce the burden, both economic and in terms of time, of developing a parallel, separate program. One of the points I want to be very clear on, because there was some confusion, I think, early on when we first rolled this out conceptually, both to industry and NRC, we are not proposing to use ISO 9001 as a replacement for Part 50. This would be using 9001 as an alternative means to meet the requirements of Part 50. And we do know that it's employed in many other industries, and even in this industry, various places around the world. So there is some track record that we can point to in terms of its viability. Next slide, please. Yeah, and as Paul pointed out, industry is really not starting from scratch. He spoke to the SECI 03, 0117. For us, that's one of our starting points. It's sort of a touch base for our effort. We took a look at that and how that matched up to the then current 9001 program. And we took a lot of inspiration and guidance in developing what we're doing now. Around that same time frame, EPRI also did a parallel or somewhat parallel comparison and has published that in one of their reports. And I just mentioned earlier about other regulated industries and other industries in general using 9001. A couple examples, one of our member companies, New Brunswick Power, there in Canada, they are currently using 9001 suppliers for some of their components. Now, I can't share details because I've not dug below the surface, but I will be reaching out to them to see, what they're doing and how they're doing it, to inform our process. We're also looking at some, I'll say, relatively small or smaller suppliers that are certified to 9001, do not have an Appendix B program as a means to test our process. And I'll share a little bit more on that here shortly. So with that, next slide. So, we've talked a bit here about the what in terms of what it is we're trying to do. Now, I think we need to, pivot into the implementation phase. How are we going to do this? So our approach, at least the one that we're developing for our NEI guidance document, is starting with Appendix B, kind of break that down into its discrete requirements. What specifically are they? Sort of a line by line dissection. And then do a similar deconstruction on ISO 9001 in a table format. Try to identify the comparable requirements in 9001 that would, match up with Appendix B. And then going through that process, we will note gaps, potential gaps, or clear and obvious gaps where the information or the activity is not necessarily sufficient or rigorous enough to comply with regulation. And then finally, to close that loop, recommendations for closing the gaps or addressing the gaps would have to be developed and implemented. Next slide. Okay, and depending on your viewing device or where you're sitting, this may be a bit of an eye chart, so I won't read through it, but this is an example of how we would undertake this process, or how a potential customer and a 9001 supplier would undertake the process. In a table format, something like this, you'll see extracted in the left column, a verbatim excerpt of Appendix B, and where we think we find the comparable requirements and actions in 9001. And at that point, you can do basically a side-by-side and see where the gaps are. So next slide. Yeah, and this would be sort of a summary of the process on the previous slide. Just written in basically a paragraph form, discussing what it is that was compared, potential gaps, and then what a recommendation or set of recommendations might be. Now, at that point, that becomes a business discussion between the customer and the supplier. The supplier doesn't really have a solid or rigorous 9001 program. They may not be a good candidate to do this. If the supplier has a pretty robust program, they see potential opportunities to join the supply chain for the nuclear industry, they may be willing to take on the work and make the resource commitments necessary to have a program that sufficiently closes the gaps that are identified in this process. Okay, next slide, please. So next steps, there's an industry team that's working on this. We started off with a white paper. We're now transitioning that into an NEI guidance document, NEI 2204, still very much a draft, but we hope to be submitting that potentially by the end of this year for NRC review. Some of the activities that are taking place, I alluded to earlier, are performing some dry runs. We've developed a checklist tool. We're assessing a 9001 program. We've got a couple candidate companies that seem interested and willing to participate. Obviously, that process is going to expose some weaknesses or deficiencies in our approach. So we're going to take those lessons learned and use that to inform a refined tool. And we need to develop some paragraph style process step instructions in order to use the checklist. But right now we're just trying to simply test and challenge the process to see if it produces the kind of information that would be necessary to both identify and then close the gaps. And then again, go back and look at the entire guidance document to make it consistent with our learnings. And then, as I said earlier, we'll submit that to NRC for their review and hopefully their subsequent endorsement. So with that, next slide. Additional considerations, and I mentioned this earlier, this is not necessarily for everybody or every customer or supplier. It's not a one size fits all. It would have to be a good match on both sides of that relationship, and in order for it to, be successful and proceed. One of the things that we simply have to focus on very hard, and that's the detailed assessment of the supplier's program to look for those gaps, identify, the supplemental requirements, and through periodic assessments, verify that the things that are required have been and are still being implemented consistent with the commercial and contractual commitments that would be required to close the gaps. This question has come up from time to time. The next bullet, the purchaser would maintain the Part 21 responsibility, and the supplier or vendor would then be compelled to impose those reporting requirements on the sub-tier suppliers if they use any. And again, as I mentioned, this is a business decision for a customer and a supplier. It's not for everyone, but in cases where there's a good match and a good fit, it does offer, I think, a great deal of potential benefit to the whole industry going forward. Next slide, please. Okay, I think Stephanie had mentioned at the top, we're going to hold questions to the end, but would welcome them time permitting after next presentation. So with that, I think I'm turning it over. Who am I turning it over to?
We have Roger up next.
There you are, Roger. Passing the virtual baton.
All right, great, thank you. I'm Roger Mills. I'm with NUPIC, the Nuclear Procurement Issues Corporation. We used to be a committee, but for legal purposes, we went with the corporation just to provide a little extra protection to the utilities involved and to our organization. So we're now a corporation. We have our website down there at the bottom. You can visit at any time, www.nupic.com. Along with that, if you go to our website, you go down the left column of different items we have listed, you can go in and you can actually look at our documents, see what it is we do, see the different checklists that we use and have available. So it's all there. It's for free. You can use them at your choice. The next slide. So a slide I recently saw in MSN.com is nuclear power is on the brink of a $1 trillion resurgence. That's all this new nuclear. But one accident anywhere could stop that momentum. The momentum depends on international cooperation around safety and best practices. The issue, how nuclear industry works and is perceived globally, any accident anywhere is an accident everywhere. Really affects us because, you know, you look in the headlines and it's nuclear did this, nuclear did that. It isn't any one in particular. They look at it as everybody. So one of the things NUPIC does, if we can go to the next slide, is we look at what all the utilities need. All right, Nuclear Procurement Issues Corporation, we're a nonprofit organization, and we support the utility members. And that's those members that are licensed by the NRC to operate nuclear plants in accordance with 10 CFR 50 Appendix B. And we provide efficiencies and consistencies in auditing. So that includes sharing manpower for performing audits and data storage. So what we're looking at is you have your QA program for your utility. And as Paul had mentioned, this flows down to your vendors. We're the ones that keep that consistency with the vendors. We're the ones that schedule the audits and divide up the responsibilities evenly amongst the members. Our mission as the NUPIC organization will strive to improve the supplier assurance processes through cooperative efforts while minimizing utility O&M costs and improving plant performance. Right now we have 38 utilities and one extra member, and the member is EPRI, and they're either active plants, they're in startup, or they could be in a decommissioning phase. And 12 of our members are international. Paul had mentioned Canada earlier. We have both Canadian utilities, Mexico, and many others from around the world. Next slide. NUPIC itself, since we're a corporation, we have an executive steering committee made up of different members, chairman, vice chairman, treasurer, secretary, and then we have various, the 4 region reps, representatives, and an international representative. The key thing to take from this slide is noticing that all different utilities are represented on our steering committee. Okay, so it's no one utility, you know, because of size or anything, that they have a greater advantage. Everybody's offered the opportunity to run for positions, and we only pick one per utility to be on our steering committee. Next slide. We do operate as a nonprofit corporation. So that means we're not out to make money. We're out to provide the best efficient, cost-effective method we can for getting audits completed. We do have dues, and that goes toward meetings and other different things. We have a database on the website that we have to maintain. It goes for costs such as that. And our whole goal there is maintain focus on the best interest of the members. So that means every utility that's a member of NUPIC has a voting responsibility, and they have the ability to bring up any issue they want to the entire committee so that we can discuss it and as a group determine what is correct. It's a cooperative program for the evaluation of vendor supplier performance. NUPIC itself does not perform audits. I know a lot of times you'll hear, oh, you're going to get NUPIC audited. Well, you're going to get an audit performed that was scheduled by NUPIC, but each lead for each audit, their utility is responsible for that audit. So that means if, like, for example, my company, PSEG, if I lead the audit, then it's a PSEG-led audit. It's done under my program. Okay, we'll use the checklists that we develop and have stored on the NUPIC database, but overall, that's my audit. NUPIC schedules the audits. Okay, we also have 3 meetings a year. where it provides a forum so that we can discuss any other procurement quality assurance issues. As mentioned earlier, NEI 17025 for calibration labs was discussed. At one point in time, that came up in one of our meetings, and we developed our checklists to respond to the new changes. So we're always trying to stay on top of that. And we provide an interface for procurement quality assurance activities. All right, next slide, please. NUPIC itself has several different committees, and we interface with a lot of different folks. So, for example, NRC, NEI, they're usually at our meetings, the 3 meetings we have a year. NITSL we'll do once every couple years. EPRI's always at our meetings. And then you got NITSL, the NQML group, NQML, which is our managers quality forum. They'll attend our meetings, and then we have various owner groups that also we interact with. Next slide. Within NUPIC, we have a variety of committees, and they consist of a committee chair and then different members from the utilities that perform and manage all the work. They report to the steering committee and the utility representatives. So what happens is, I'll give a quick list of the committees that we have, and all our folks from the utilities volunteer in order to be on these committees. So it's non-paid, but it's a great learning opportunity, and you get to have a voice in more detailed areas of how NUPIC works and the different procedures that we use and share. And again, the benefits, your people get to learn leadership skills, and you have some network opportunities. Next slide. I'm not going to explain all the details on all of these, but overall we have the steering committee. Because we collect dues, we have bills, we have to rent hotels to do conferences. We have a finance committee. A vendor interface committee also meets 3 times a year, and it monitors what's happening with the vendors. They set the meetings up the 3 times a year. The June meeting will be our vendor meeting, where we bring in all the vendors, or we offer the opportunity for all vendors to come in and have a voice, get to hear different speakers. Like this June, I'm sure we'll have someone from NRC talking. I've also lined up for some members of Department of Energy, the DOE, to come in and speak. So that'll be in Denver in June. We have Process Management Committee, and this is where we do a little bit of everything, and it's all the NUPIC procedures, and along with our procedures, when we perform audits, we also provide feedback on each other. So the team members provide feedback on what the lead did, how the lead performed, and the lead will also provide feedback on how the members performed. So we take this very serious and critical, and we audit ourselves to a point, to make sure that we're doing the right thing and getting better. And we also have the option for the vendors that we're auditing to provide feedback on us. Okay, we want to take their input, what did we do right, what did we do wrong, and keep us on track. Next slide. Other committees we have, fuel is very important, so we have specific fuel committees that keep track and perform surveillances on our different fuel suppliers. Our IT, because we have a database, we have to have people involved in that. We're constantly making changes to it, making it better. Vendor Performance Monitoring Committee schedules all the audits. It's a big event that happens once a year. It's usually around the March-April time frame, and it sets the audits for the entire next year. Okay, and from that point, we have the options of being able to swap back and forth between members, to better match up our schedules, maybe do an audit closer to home, maybe there's a vendor that we've had a lot of problems with, and we really need to get in and see their facility. So we'll swap back and forth on these vendors. Training committee, every January meeting, or what we call the winter meeting, we also have 2 days of training, 1 or 2 days of training that we provide to all the NUPIC auditors and a lot of the new folks that are joining in, first coming in as auditors. And we'll provide training for them to help make sure they're doing the right things. So as a new nuclear utility coming into NUPIC, you're going to get the opportunity to receive a lot of training. And along with that, as we keep this on our database, so you've got a lot of lessons that were done before that now will apply to what you're doing. Next slide. I'd mentioned earlier that with ILAC and 17025 coming into play, that yeah, can I get next? Yeah, there we go. Okay, that you know, we had talked about it. We formed a committee to make sure that we had input on this, and we did the side-by-side match for the 17025, 2005, and the 2017 to find out the differences to ensure that we were still meeting all the requirements and making recommendations for the NRC for the acceptance of it. And part of that is that NUPIC has the requirement of going on some of the ILAC audits to ensure that they're being done to meet standards. So we reach out above just the auditing process, and we observe other things just to make sure that the requirements are met. We have what's vendor improvement groups. What that is you get a vendor that, you know, it might have been going real good for a while for them, and all of a sudden they might have changed locations, changed management, done something drastic to where their performance drops off. Well, we have the ability to do a few different things. One of them is we can increase the auditing schedule on that vendor. Another one is that we can develop a team in order to help make them better. We don't tell them what to do, but we monitor and work with them as close as we can to ensure they're doing the right things to get back on track. And we found we've had a pretty good success rate with that. It's done quite well. All right, next slide. So why be a member of NUPIC? Well, first of all, it's increased efficiencies. When you look at how many audits you would have to perform, according to Appendix B, all your audits that provide safety-related items or services, they would have to be audited. And if you have 130 suppliers on your approved suppliers list, that would be 43 audits a year that you would be responsible for, or something near 4 a month. And that's a lot of folks to do all that work. You break that down as a member of NUPIC, and when we share audits, that 130 suppliers now goes to a number around 13. So it's around 1 a month. So it saves you, you know, 4 times the cost there. And that's a pretty good efficiency number there. Next slide. Shared knowledge, another good reason, because we maintain the database that contains the supplier's location, their scope, QA context, certifications. We track all the audit activities. We identify overdue items. We have automated email systems. So QA company vendor changes their QA manual and sends it into NUPIC. It automatically distributes out to all the users to let them know that changes were made. So it's kind of an automated system. It's pretty nice. It works quite well. We also have, like I had mentioned, 3 meetings a year. We have our winter meeting. So that's the January meeting where we include training with that. And we'll include a few interfaces with some other outside organizations at that meeting. We have our June meeting where we invite all the vendors that we audit, and even some that don't. We invite them in so that they can come in and be part of the talks. And we'll spend a couple days to have discussions with them to let them know what's going on in the industry, new changes, anything like that. Next slide. So to kind of sum this all up, we can provide increased efficiencies, knowledge sharing, a database for scheduling, tracking, assignments, team members, and archives. That's all our audits, all our documents. You get to have lessons learned for audit performance. We share those. We update on vendor performance issues. Every meeting, the 3 meetings a year, we discuss any problems with all of our vendors, or we discuss all the vendor problems amongst ourselves. We don't share information outside. We have the opportunity to share in focused oversight of troubled vendors. That was the performance groups that I was mentioning. And we have consistent, objective audits and survey checklists. We have checklists for the audits, for surveys, for radiological, for fuels, for the SAFER group. We have audits, checklists built for all of them. And then access to continually improve improvement opportunities. So in other words, you have an auditor goes on an audit, uses a checklist, he sees something isn't right, he can bring that up and we can make it better. So overall, as a nuclear industry, if there's an accident or incident, it's the nuclear industry that gets put in the headlines. And we're here to try to help prevent those types of headlines. Next slide. And Stephanie, I think it's back to you now.
Thank you so much. So we have had a couple of questions come in, and I will pitch them to our presenters. But in the meantime, if anybody in the audience has additional questions, go ahead and send them on over. And if we don't get to the questions today, we will either include some sort of response in our second Tech Talk, or we'll post some responses on our website as well. So the first question is for Paul. The question is, what is NRC's expectation with regards to reactor design, reactor designer and licensees quality program basis? Are they allowed to employ ISO 9001 as their quality program basis to comply with 10 CFR 50 Appendix B?
Okay, that's kind of a rough question from the standpoint that the Part 53 rulemaking for advanced reactors isn't out yet. So I have to give you the canned answer that the current regulatory framework for your safety-related SSCs associated with the design would have to be done under Appendix B. Now, that's not to say, as Mark pointed out, and the SECI pointed out, that's not to say an ISO-based program is not doable. It would but in the current regulatory framework, you'd probably have to bolster it somehow. And the SECI gives you where those areas for your particular scope of work that you would have to supplement your program. Now, there are examples of vendors who have ISO/Appendix B programs. Those are like the GEs and the Westinghouses, your big architect engineering firms, or NSSS, nuclear steam system suppliers, that have joint QA programs. So that's because they work globally. And to Mark's point, what you see globally is ISO applied in a lot of different places. So again, I think it's kind of premature to answer that question, but if you were to have a program, like I said, in the current framework of Part 50, Part 52, you'd probably have to supplement it. Does that answer the question?
I think so, and thank you for being willing to even take a run at it. So our next question is for Mark. Mark, the question is the discussion on use of commercial quality programs, for example, ISO 9001 and AS 9100, targeted at designer constructor licensee options for procurement of safety-related items? Mark?
Yeah, potentially that's part of our vision, that suppliers with the sufficient bolstering or augmented requirements imposed would be able to meet Appendix B requirements.
Great, thank you. Our next question is for Roger. Roger, how can a potential supplier get onto the NUPIC list of suppliers to be audited?
To get onto the NUPIC list requires a utility to pick up that vendor and perform an audit first. That would get them entered into the NUPIC database. In order for NUPIC to schedule regular audits, a vendor would have to have 5 users in order to be scheduled on a regular basis.
Great, thank you. Here's another question. I think it's probably for Paul, but maybe Mark. Is NQA1 a safe harbor for designers and licensees?
I think that's probably more appropriate for Paul.
Yeah.
I can comment after if need be.
So yes, it would be a quote unquote safe harbor. As spelled out in Regulatory Guide 1.28, and again, it would depend on the version of NQA1. Essentially, almost all of the NQA1 versions have been approved for design and construction use. The only ones that come to mind are the 1997, 2000, and 2002 editions were never approved by the NRC. Other than that, it's pretty much, you could even use, arguably, you could use the ANSI standards as one method of meeting Appendix B. So almost every version of NQA1 and the ANSI standards have been found as an acceptable method of meeting Appendix B.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, I have nothing else to add.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Let's see. Oh, we just had another question come in. What is the expected efficiency gain with using a bolstered ISO vendor over performing CGD? Also, how does risk of receiving unacceptable product factor into that equation?
Yeah, this is Mark. I'll take a shot, at least in part, at that question, which I think is a two-part. But we've taken the approach, at least going in, as we're developing the process, and as I indicated earlier, we're still working on that. In terms of cost or cost savings, that's not something that we're not privy to a company's financial information or their cost structure for doing something like this. That's why we've presented this as not being a one-size-fits-all. It may make perfect sense for one supplier and make absolutely no sense for the next one, and that's an individual sort of a business decision at that point. If you get through the gap analysis and understand what actions and requirements are needed to be implemented to close the gaps, then the customer and supplier have to have the conversation in terms of resources and whether or not the customer wants to provide additional, some support to help the supplier and so forth. That gets way off the theme of what it is we're trying to do. We're trying to create a process, a tool that can be used and can be used in situations where it makes sense.
Thank you. Anybody else want to chime in on that one?
This is Paul. I mean, I think Mark hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's almost a custom order type thing. It depends on your situation and what may work best for you. You may find commercial grade dedication to be a better option, or you may find that if you bolster this company's QA program, ISO program, with a few additional things, it may, in the long run, be better if it's a supplier you're going to use constantly. Again, I think it boils down to more of a financial issue than really are you able to do it. The answer is yeah, you have options there, and those options have been discussed today.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So we're closing in on the end of our presentation. But if anybody has any additional questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or reach out to NRIC at nric.inl.gov and look for more information about our second Tech Talk, which is coming up in November. And if there's anything that you're really interested in seeing NRIC present in a Tech Talk, please feel free to reach out and we would love to explore that with you. So thank you again to all of our wonderful presenters and to everyone in the audience for joining us today. We will post this recording on our website as well as the slides. So look for more from us, and thank you again and have a wonderful day.
Hey, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.